So can we talk about the outage that happened in the last 24 hours and what actually happened? And I don't necessarily want to go into too much details into the Crowdstrike story because everybody's been covering that. I want to talk about the broader issue that happened prior to Crowdstrike. So I'm going to go to the limit to say here that Microsoft just genuinely lucked out in the fact that they had a massive outage just within the same news cycle as the CrowdStrike outage and just completely got saved by the bell here. And I want to talk about that specifically because I was actually affected by it. But I don't want to go into the technical. This is more of a rant if I'm being honest. But what I'd like to do is just kind of peel back the curtains from my perspective and talk about some of the trends that I've seen in the last 24 hours and how does that impact us as a society and some of the things that we need to start thinking about. The reason why I want to have this video is because, my mom she was traveling yesterday and, she mentioned to me, she was like, hey, yeah, there's an outage. We don't know what's going on with the airlines, blah, blah, blah kind of stuff. And I was like, if my mom's talking about this, then there's other people that are kind of wanted to have some sense of what really happened. The problem is that there's multiple conversations that are happening at once. And if you listen to the news right now, the news media is very interesting because they zone in on something as they should, because it was the biggest problem that existed. People couldn't fly to their destinations, and that's the reason why the story kind of just blew up out of nowhere. And suddenly everybody's hearing about CrowdStrike, and we're like, what the hell is CrowdStrike? Oh, it's a company. Oh, what did they do? Something with security. Oh, maybe it's a cyber attack, right? Like we just keep piling on all of these type of layers to this entire situation. So what I want to do is I want to take just a slightly different approach and talk about a couple of things that happened before the CrowdStrike conversation got really big on the internet, and then secondly, talk about some of the dependencies of our system, because that's what's happening right now. We're like if you talk about social and economics and stuff like that, there's this whole notion of like the power in the few, right? Like, so there's like 1% of our people that control the rest of the world kind of deal, 99% or something like that, whatever the numbers are. So that's basically what I want to talk about. So let me just kind of take a step back, and I'll try to be as descriptive as I possibly can. So first of all, I thought this tweet was funny. This girl said, she was like, happy blue screen day, right? And in a setting like this, at a boardroom, hey, a couple of laptops went down, we can't do our meeting. That's fine, right? However, when you start talking about on a global level, some of the chaotic things that was happening on that day, massive outage in airlines, hospital, banks, suddenly this is not a ha-ha anymore, right? Like now we're into serious territory where lives are literally being not just disrupted, but potentially, like people are dying. It's possible, right? If these things are affecting hospitals, these blue screen of deaths are affecting hospital, we really need to start taking a step back and think about what really happened here and why. Not just why did this happen, the technical folks will figure that out, but the level of dependency on our platform. So I'm going to do a couple of things. One is I want to kind of whiteboard my just thoughts on this, and then I'll give you some of my 2 cents on what I think. But first, let's just kind of talk about this. Let's just talk about the timeline, because the timelines are important. And this is a rough sketch. It's not a sort of what do you call it? Losing my train of thought, but anyway, it's not like a detailed, exact train of thought. It's just a rough train of guideline. So let me talk and I'll give you from my perspective. So we're today is 2024 20th 4:30 a.m. 4:42 a.m. on the 20th of July. Okay, so we're here 20th th, right? And 19th, right, and 18th. Okay, so this kind of timeline here. So I got a notification yesterday from one of our customers saying, hey, your platform is down. And by platform, which we're still working out, by the way, this is our platform here. I've been working through the issues, trying to figure out what's going on. It's extremely slow. extremely slow. So we're actually still being affected by this outage. And I know we are, and I'll prove that in a bit, but we actually are being affected by this outage. But the point is that the outage is being mitigated in such a way that it's not a problem anymore. So people like me just don't have a voice anymore. But I want to talk about this still. So let's just talk about this. So my application went down on the 18th. So let's call it 6 p.m. because that's roughly when I got the message. So it was kind of after the business day, so we didn't have a lot of customers that were affected by it. Not a lot of people work on our platform on the Eastern time zone after 6 p.m. So that was kind of like a saving grace for us. And over the night, I started it was just really monitoring what was going on. And I particularly remember it because my kid woke up at like 1 a.m. and then he wouldn't go back to sleep, and then he was up at 3 a.m. kind of deal. And normally I just spent some time with him, but I was actually on my phone trying to figure out what was happening during that time frame, and Twitter was just going crazy about an Azure outage, not Crowdstrike, an Azure outage. Okay, and so that was one thing that happened. And then as the Azure outage started to slowly come back online, directly in that a new cycle of stories started happening, and you started getting this overlap of a CrowdStrike outage. Oh, CROWD, all right? STRIKE, right? Whatever, okay? You get the idea. So we start getting this overlap. So there was this window of time where there was actually an Azure outage happening and a CrowdStrike happening at the same time. But the problem is that the news, right? So this is, let's say, 6 a.m. Okay, so Australia and some of the other parts of the world, obviously they're ahead of us, right? They're like here, so they started reporting it. Okay, they started reporting some of the problems that were happening, but the western part of the world wasn't actually waking up. So most people got this news around like 6, 7, 8, whatever time they wake up, kind of deal. Like, hey, we got a big problem, etc. People are trying to get into work, trying to get into their banks, etc. And these were some of the problems that were happening. And then the western part of the world jumped on the CrowdStrike news cycle. And there's very few people, I say relatively speaking, very few people that even knew or was aware about the Azure outage that were happening. But this was not just any sort of like basic Azure outage. This was a massive outage. And that's the problem that I want to kind of zone into for a bit. So let's just talk about that for a second, then we'll come back to this. So first of all, let me just highlight the fact that there's still a problem right now. Again, 20th of July 2022. So right now, this is my actual dashboard for our internal platform, and this dashboard is different than Microsoft's external dashboard, which they have here. Okay, no, this one, sorry. So if you go to the Azure external dashboard, public facing dashboard, they'll talk about the awareness of a CrowdStrike issue, etc., and how to fix it, etc. And then it kind of shows you the problems that exist across the board. So basically how this works is that there's different regions in with Azure, and it just has these check marks to indicate which regions are working and then which services are running correctly. And here it's just showing pretty much every single thing is okay. That's not 100% true. What I found with this dashboard is that most of the time, it lags significantly from what's actually happening on the real world. So Microsoft has this internal dashboard, and this is for actual paying customers that actually gives you a sense of what's going on. And right now this has been updated 20 hours ago, and it has this triangle. The triangle shows affected regions. I wish I'd taken a screenshot of this. I wish, because at one point in the night, it's just because I was on my phone. I said, like I said, with my son, I couldn't. But there was I could, but I just didn't. At one point, there was multiple triangles across this map, multiple triangles, and there was pretty much every service on this entire that you're seeing here had a triangle on it. There was a full-on outage at one point across the board in multiple different regions. Okay, I can't say all regions, but definitely the significant major regions across North America. So this is just a internal, again, details of some of the services that were affected by this outage. All right, 19 hours ago, Azure Purview, which nobody really knows about, but anyway, Azure Virtual Machines, Azure Backup, Azure Lab Service, Cognitive Services, which is their AI services. I won't go into all the land stuff. Microsoft Cosmos DB, so this is what we depend on. We depend on this database quite a bit. Explorer, Azure Front End, like it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Okay, so this is what was actually happening. MySQL. So we're talking every single service, pretty much, that's on their platform was 100% down. Okay, in the central US region, and I think 2 or 3 other regions. Now, the way how they're describing this outage is the fact is that this outage was led based on a configuration change. I'm like, configuration change. Where have we heard that before? That's interesting. I've heard that somewhere before. So now they will swear by their life that there's nothing related. These are 2 separate independent, and they actually might just very well be. I'm not claiming that they are. I don't work for Microsoft. I don't know what's going on in their team. So let's jump to Reddit for a second. So this guy was convicted, this guy here, 1 day ago, right? The impact list of companies keep growing, and yet no word. Everything seems fine, right? This is again just my point about Azure and the fact that this status board always lags. So that's a problem. Now, so he said they removed it because blah, 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 blah kind of deal. Okay. And then scroll down a little bit more. So people, the people here kept saying, so this guy says, I'll change the thread, Azure Central Outage. So because people keep saying that these were not affected, right? So the issue is being triggered by a Crowdstrike update. And that's the problem. The people that woke up, so it's fine. I find it very fascinating. So the people that woke up, if you got up, let's choose a different color for a second. So if you woke up here, 6 a.m., like your Twitter, your updates, your notifications has nothing to do with CrowdStrike. Sorry, with Azure. Like the only single thing that you're hearing is about this CrowdStrike because that's what the internet is flooded with. However, if you were anywhere in the IT space or any person that is like closely tied to Azure, you would have known that there was an outage. At least I hope you would have known that there was an outage there. So what you're seeing on the Reddit forums is this merge of conversations that are happening. That's why this guy said the Azure related cloud specific issue, but the issue has been triggered by a CrowdStrike update, right? Because he's just thinking, hey, it's just a CrowdStrike problem. Fast forward a little bit more into this conversation. It's very interesting, right? So this guy said the central outage was unrelated to CrowdStrike. Yeah, okay, fair enough. And if I keep going down more, Microsoft was mostly resolved. And somebody said, where is it? I'm looking for it right now. Let me just see. So he said Japan. Yeah, here. So I believe it was 3 regions: North, Central, South, Central, and right. These are major Azure regions. We're talking an entire data center came offline, and yet Microsoft is literally saved by the bell because CrowdStrike had a bigger outage. So I don't know if these stories are related, but I can't help but think that they are. Now, Microsoft has publicly said they're not related because they don't want people to know. I mean, I'm making assumptions here, but if it did, they'd have to come clean at some point, I presume. But they're saying that it's just a configuration problem. But I'm like, configuration problems? This seemed a little bit suspicious to me. So those are the kind of just general things that I wanted to kind of share. But let's just jump on a couple other things that I wanted to kind of point out, just about our infrastructure and what's going on, right? So you have this, and by the way, Microsoft. Let's just prove it. So Microsoft is an actual, I'm almost certain about this because I heard this somewhere, that Microsoft is actually, CrowdStrike is a contractor of Microsoft. But I don't have any proof of that. I'm going to have to look for that. I actually don't have the proof of that, but somewhere I heard that that was indeed the case. But I digress. What I want to talk about is not just this, but also this broader sort of like trend that you're seeing, right? Because here you have, so let's go from like the thing, right? Like you, okay, so let's do this. Let's go here, do a new board. So, right, I mean, it's very obvious, right? So you got, let's call it the startups, right? You got the startups, you got the SME, small business and enterprise, right? Mom and pop shop, kind of sit in. You got the, let's call it the large companies. So this would be like your, let's call it your, so let's go with like your banks, right? Your medical, you know, travel, airports, right? So you got sitting on this layer, and then interestingly enough, right, we're like more and more this consolidation of all these companies are basically they're sitting on like what I would call stilts. Okay, I'll talk about what I mean by that in a bit. So stilts. So you got the Googles, right? You got the Azure. You got the AWS, Amazon Web Service, right? Sitting on stilts. I'll talk about the stilts thing in a sec. And then you have, on top of that, you have a company like Crowdstrike, because Microsoft did in one of their posts, they did admit that it was affected by the outage was a network, or I shouldn't say network outage. It seems like we're saying, but AWS and Azure and Google also had problems. So, but interestingly enough, CROWD, crowd, STRIKE, right? You have this company that nobody's really heard of, let's just face it, until today. This CrowdStrike company that has embeddings in the Azure ecosystem is sitting in a Windows computer somewhere in Azure. I'm going to just talk about Azure because I don't know much about AWS. I didn't really pay much attention to them because I didn't have any affected services there. So interestingly enough, you got this picture where you got startups, SME, banks, medical, airports, etc., sitting on these big companies, like 3-4 of them, right? I mean, you could put IBM in there or whatever, but I don't know who's on IBM. And then you have a case where a company like CrowdStrike that nobody's ever heard of, that's literally has a service in there. So this is conspiracy theory level here, okay? So what I actually believe that happened, this is, again, no proof of this and total conspiracy theory here. So let's just put that out there, okay? But I believe in some certainty that CrowdStrike did actually release an update. That release was released to a small, let's call it a small set of systems that are in Azure, that are Windows related. That wasn't a deployment by Azure because I don't think their IT people were like that. They would probably vet it and there would be some sort of configuration change because they got a new security update of some sort. Okay, that configuration change brought down some sort of internal system, because that's what they're publicly saying. Hey, we made a configuration change, it brought down our systems, and that triggered out a widespread outage across the board. So therefore, it got banned. And I think that in AWS is obviously have some Windows stuff or whatever, and that happened. And these guys, they're IT people, obviously smart enough, like, hey, what happened here? Well, let's fix this, blah blah blah. And they got their services back up. Okay. However, CrowdStrike also deploys to things like news services, banks, right, airports, etc., and as a result, these companies didn't have the same resources to be able to fix the problem across the board. This is total conspiracy theory. I don't think necessarily this is exactly how it happened, but what I'm trying to get more the point across here is that there's a level of dependency between these systems and services that is not necessarily immediately obvious, right? So it's only obvious to us, the regular people, when you get a situation like this, right, where your airport is suddenly, you know, it's just completely flat and everybody's just standing in line waiting for, you know, their planes to think, right? Like that's, this is when it starts to matter. This is when the public, the regular public, starts to think. So we have kind of a really big problem, and it's going to take a lot of resources to kind of just to get this under control, right? I think we definitely have to start reassessing, like, the level of dependency that we have on these companies now. Let's be real. Everybody's like just trusting that Microsoft, Google, AWS are just going to do the right thing. They're going to solve the problem, and everybody's just going to be, you know, ignore the thing. But when you have a situation like this where every single major company, I mean, Twitter was fine. You know, look at the banks, right? You're seeing this. By the way, the hump here that you're seeing on this side of the graph is as a result of the Azure crash. And then if you see two bumps, basically it's because there was a second crash which had to do with the Crowdstrike. I forgot their name now. Yes, Crowdstrike. Right? So these are all Azure related sort of outages, and then again, like I said, right? So there's definitely a problem here. There's no question about it. Last but not least, I'll talk very quickly about us, Snapsuite, and what was happening, because again, we're still having problems. We are still having problems, and if I pull this dashboard up, so they said it was configuration issue. I highlighted the fact that it was like every service that was also had a problem. 20 hours ago, every service, right? It was literally just all services were down, and when you go to, going back to the Azure portal for a sec, major, where are we at? Here, right? No, this one, right? When you go back to this, it just talks about the fact that there is mostly thing. Now here's what it says here. So we're aware of the issue that happened on July 19. Customers experience unresponsive failure, blah, 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 blah. Crowdstrike Falcon agent affecting both on-premise and various cloud platforms, Azure, AWS, and Google, right? So this tells me in vague language that this actually happened, okay? Crowdstrike did actually get a rollout and deployment. It's just the coincidence of this timeline here. It's just too close for it not to be some sort of overlap in dependencies. That's the part that I want to think about. Oh, I never talk about the stilts. So this stilts thing, I'm all over the place here, but let's just talk about these stilts and why I put these and specifically label them as stilts, is because where I grew up is I grew up in Guyana, and it's a third world country if you don't know, and they have we call houses on stilts. House on, like this, okay? So in most, it's called third world countries or whatever, where there's flooding and known ways, like known sort of problems with flooding, they build houses on stilts like this, right? And as you can see, right, clearly somebody expects that water is going to be coming in, and so to keep the house properly up, you put it on stilts, and that's kind of the where my thought process comes. So I would like to describe the infrastructure of the entire internet closer to this. Whoever this, me, closer to this. It's just a lot of stilts holding up our entire infrastructure, and every now and again you get one or two that breaks, and nobody complains. But every now and again, the whole stilts infrastructure just breaks. the whole thing. And that's an example of what happened today with CrowdStrike. It's just things broke. So we're going to have to figure out how to fix this, and we're going to have to figure out as a society, what do we do about this? Because more and more we're getting to a state of just fragility. Hopefully I use that word correctly. I try to use these big words and I don't even know if they were like right. So I just want to talk very quickly about sort of Snapsuite and what kind of happened from our perspective, like my actual application perspective, just to kind of talk about that. And you know, you may or may not care. So way how, like, if you were to like think of North America, this is North America, okay? This is my interpretation of what North America looks like. So we actually have multiple region deployments, but it's kind of a fake multiple region. Okay, so let me just explain. So we have a deployment that is in East US, we have a deployment that's in West US, and we have a deployment that's in Central US. This is the reason why I am care about this particular issue, okay? So if you're somebody living, let's say in Florida, and you went to our application, you would hit the closest server, aka this one. Or you would hit, if you were like say here, right, you get the idea, you would hit this one. If you were over here, you would hit this one. And that just makes things fast for our application to load internally very fast. If you're in the rest of the world, yeah. So that just makes things fast for us to be able to load things very quickly. The problem is that the front end is on all of these systems. However, our data, we've kind of just to keep things simple, centralize our data in one location, because we're like, well, if you're in the middle of the country, at least the front will load fast, and it'll take another second for it to load the data. So, you know, to get back to you, but at least it's kind of centralized. So it's like everybody gets almost equal kind of rights. That's kind of the thought process that we went through. And obviously that's a big problem. Now, if you have more money, resources, time, effort, energy, etc., what you would end up doing is, with most companies would do, is they replicate the data potentially in 2 or 3 environments. But this costs a lot of money. And the question is, how often are you going to have an outage at this level that you need to have replicas of the data? Because you also have to remember that whatever your cost is, you're tripling your costs, right? So that becomes the reason. So there's this, now you get to a level where it's like, you know what, 99 point, call it 98, sort of like SLA, right? Service level agreement. It's fine. Would translate to, I think, is about 4, maybe an hour or 2 outage per year, I think is what it is, right? Like SLA calculations, right? I think, right. So 99.9% of uptime availability translates to okay, yes, about 1 year of 52 minutes, call it an hour of outage a year. So I'm like, you know what, in a year, if we have 1 hour of an outage, that's fine, right? 98 would bring that down a little bit more. How do I press enter? Right, so that would bring that to 1 hour and 48 minutes. So this is within the realm of okay. If you had an outage and that outage happened at 2 a.m. in the Western time zone, nobody cares. Everybody's sleeping for the most part, unless your service is like Uber or something where you're coming out from a bar or something like that, right? So that's a different conversation. But for the most part, if you're like a typical business, that's okay. So anyway, I'm rambling. I just wanted to talk through this because for me, what I found interesting about this entire story here, for example, see here, Microsoft remains in a degraded state because Office 365 was also affected by some of these outages. Has nothing to do with the CrowdStrike, and that was kind of the thing that was like, do people realize what's actually going on here? Because Microsoft, you know, if you look at, let me see if you could find very quickly Satya Nadella's outage, because I think this is interesting. Okay. I'm rambling. Anyway, if you got some value from this video, like, subscribe to it. I talk about more things related to productivity, things related to just trying to improve my own personal self, and sometimes kind of rant about technology, and this is one of those conversation. So if you're here and you're new to the channel, and you got some value out of this, feel free to subscribe. Every now and again I do a rant. I'm not necessarily always doing a rant, but if it's something big enough, I will rant about it. And if that's the kind of thing that so here, if you look at this, you see yesterday Crowdstrike released an update that began impacting blah 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 kind of deal, right? There's simply no place. And then see here, if you notice, there's kind of a gap. Like Satya never actually talked about anything that had to do with any of the major outage that happened in Azure. But there was a major outage that happened in Azure. I've proven it to you because it's here, right? And it's not just a small outage. But again, Microsoft, this goes back to my point on my original thing here. Microsoft was just saved by the bell in terms of how our news cycle works, right? Everybody was just sort of focused on everything that happened from this timeline hours. And so Microsoft just got, they're like, wow, did we dodge the bullet on that one? So anyway, I'm wrapping this up. If you got some value from this video, feel free to like it, subscribe to the channel, come back and let's just talk about some of the issues that are happening in our own personal life mostly. But when our personal issues start being affected by the world, it's important that we talk about it as well too. And so that's what this video is about. Thank you for your time. Have yourself a wonderful day. Oh, now where's the end recording?